Welcome to What? That Old Queen, a candid and adult take on queer life quandaries at a certain age, so please listen at your own discretion. Presented by Bernie and Tommy, their views are their own and in no way reflect those of any service you may hear this program on. Now, let your ears be upstanding for the Old Queen. Hey Tommy.
If I'm ugly, then so are you.
Are you referring to the Sugar Babes by any chance?
I am, yeah.
Which we saw in Bristol last night, the beginning of their tour. And what did you think?
I thought they were amazing. Every song was just a banger, really.
Yeah, it was
a great
brilliant.
night.
Yeah, absolutely loved it. And it was packed in there, wasn't it?
Yeah. And then I went home and couldn't sleep, so I just Googled everything about them all. So I know everything about bum replacements, breast enlargements, taking them out again. It's all happened to Mattia.
Oh, really? She's had the full works.
And they've taken them out, but I thought they felt like they were in last night.
Yeah, she looked really good,
Yeah.
didn't she?
Yeah, she looked really good. You could tell, even from a great distance that we were, that she's had a lot of work done.
Yeah.
But good on her.
Yeah, looking good on it. And who's your favourite?
Oh, I don't know. I think I sort of flipped, really, but probably Mattia.
Yeah, I think she's my favourite as well. Which one's the one that left early on?
Siobhan.
I do like her.
Yeah, she's kind of more like ethereal and a bit more... She's a bit pre-Raphaelite.
Yeah, and it must be a bit weird for her because she's singing songs when she wasn't actually part of the Sugar Babes.
I mean, probably they all were.
Yeah, this is true.
And some of the girls that work behind the bar look like they'd been in the Sugar Babes at some point.
And yeah, there was a security guard that looked like Heidi at the end.
I mean, you've got to work, you know.
Well, maybe they were all there, you know, but just doing different roles.
Solidarity.
Yeah, exactly.
I did find out as well that they were, you probably know this, but they originally were called the Sugar Babies.
Right.
Because they were only like 12 when they first got together.
Right. Okay.
But they updated it.
I think I prefer the Sugar Babes than the Sugar Babies. Sugar Babies has a different connotation, which I'm not sure I like. So how have you been? So I had to do a show without you.
I know.
But you were there in spirit.
I liked it. I enjoyed Peter's impression of me as well. I feel like I should do one of him in return.
Go on then.
Well, no, I set myself up for a fall. Quintessentially. No, it's not that at all, is it? But I feel like he would say quintessentially quite a lot.
Yeah, he uses a lot of big words, doesn't he?
Yeah, very well-mannered and beautifully talked.
Yes.
Well, not like me.
Well spoken.
Yeah. Beautifully talked.
He wasn't dragged up like what we were. So, what were you doing?
I was putting together a show, which actually I've been working on for the last 2 years. It's been just like a massive... I was going to say labour of love. It has been a labour of love. It's also been a labour of hatred as well, because it's just been such a full-on process. A lot of research was involved in it. And we made a show about a trans woman from the 1900s that I found in an archive in Newcastle. Just her mugshots at the beginning. So we just found her mugshots that the police caught. And it was just, the show was about kind of piecing together her life through what was documented of her, which were only her criminal actions. And I had a band and I had an actress playing this central character, and I performed as myself, but like a bit of a kind of archivist, historian type person. Yeah, but there's some really good music in it.
Amazing. And how did it go?
It was really good, yeah. It was just a struggle, and at the end, I just felt like I couldn't put. I was finding it hard to be in the show and to look at the show. So I hired for the last 4 days a director, and I think that was a really good decision.
Okay. And will you do it again?
I don't think so.
Okay. Put it to bed for a while.
Yeah, it's difficult to say. I'm still letting the dust settle.
Okay.
Yeah, but we did put together an exhibition. So we went into Gloucester archives, and we tried to find some queer stories from Gloucestershire archives about LGBTQ plus people in general. Then it was difficult because it always is finding stories in archives because there wasn't those kind of labels that we have now. But we did find some really interesting ones.
Oh, did you? Have you got some for us?
Well, there's a collection. There's a sort of small collection that we presented as text and images, and had them in the sort of foyer space of the theatre. And some of them were quite famous people, like Joe Meek, who was a music producer, sort of probably like from the 50s, 60s, and sort of spiraled into kind of struggling with his mental health, and was involved in cottaging and had soliciting young men, and then was rumoured to be part of a murder of some young gay boys, and ended up shooting his landlady. And
Is this the Telstar guy?
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a really interesting story because it speaks about like inherited trauma of gay people, and but also I think you can talk about Joe's story in the sort of. I feel like queer people are drawn to the science fiction type vibes, and with the Telstar song, it feels very space agey, and I think there probably is one, but it feels like there's a dissertation in that.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah. I got something from the archive, which was one of the first items that was found, and the archivists, when I sent them an email saying, I'm looking to do some work in the archive and try and find some queer stories, the archivist said that her heart sunk because she knew that there wasn't going to be much in there. But as soon as she started looking, she found some.
She uncovered some,
yeah. And there was this beautiful old manuscript from the 1800s, and it pertains to like a massive sort of book, like a logged document of correspondence at Westonbirt, the kind of manor and the surrounding village area that was owned by a property owner that lived in London, that was having correspondence from someone that was kind of looking after the running of the estate, and there's a kind of record that in this beautiful transcript, which I've got the extract that has been transcribed, so we can actually read it.
Okay.
So yeah, this is the correspondence to Richard, who was obviously the landowner. Dear Richard, I have yours on the 22nd instant, and according as your desire, have endeavoured to find out about George Andrews' case. In May last, one William Langley, or some such name, an inhabitant of a poor man's son of the city of Gloucester, which is interesting that they would refer to him as, or some such name, and he's the son of a poor man.
Yeah, it's almost like it's not really important, isn't it?
Well, I think it goes on to kind of talk about that because it's a story about consent, really, about someone that is rich taking advantage of someone that's poor.
Right.
Came to Westonbirt and inquired of your tenant, George Andrews, for work in husbandry and offering his service. I don't quite know what husbandry is.
It's animal husbandry, so it's about the breeding of cattle and farm animals, basically.
So William ends up lodging with and working with another farmer who's called Walter Watts. And then it says, in August last, there was whisperings about Westonbirt, as if George Andrews had buggered his fellow. But I do not find that may people believe it. Yet upon the noise Isaac Humphreys made a vessel of a very good ale, and some others contributed, and on the 22nd of September last had a mock lying in.
Oh, what's a mock lying in?
So How I understand it and how it's put in context is a mock lying in is a sort of ritual ceremony kind of thing.
Oh.
Which is a little bit like, I mean, this was the time of the Molly houses, and they famously did a lot of like rituals about like rebirthing their queer selves and
Yeah.
those kind of things.
Yeah.
So there's then a lengthy description about this ritual of the mock groaning, an elaborate act of labour, childbirth, and a baptism of a baby's named George. This was designed to shame George Andrews and possibly William, who played the part of a pregnant woman and was also dressed in petticoats.
Sounds quite fun.
Well, it's very performative, isn't
yeah.
it? Yeah, I guess there was a different sense of a shame around this sexual act as well. So it might be discussed more publicly in this kind of ritualistic forum.
Yeah.
I don't know. So Lindsay went to Mr. Kinscote for a warrant to arrest George for buggery. A warrant was issued. George was thereupon taken and carried before Mr. Stevens Linley. Before Mr. Stevens. Lindsay was examined upon oath and said on the 4th of August last, or thereabouts, at 12 o'clock at night, or about that time, after George's brother John had gone with their wagon to the coal pit, he said that Lindsay was lying or sitting on Buckmore Bridge by himself, that George came to him and took him by the hand and said to him, "You have very soft hands," which is a beautiful detail.
That's a good come on line, right?
Yeah.
I might use that.
So in the exhibition, I got the illustrator Alec to do a picture of one man holding the other one's hand, saying, "You've got very soft hands." And the compliments being over, George invited the fellow to go up to the house and lodge with him all night and to drink with him there. Then he consented. Struggled with that word. Then he consented and went with George to go into the cellar. There they drank a little, but not to excess. And then they went to bed together, and that George buggered him. That said Lindsay, who at first said he consented to it, but upon a nod afterwards retracted the words before the justices.
I don't understand. So he said he consented, but then he said he didn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's all very confusing.
Cool.
Yeah. But I think you have to think about like what the power dynamics might be in place.
And the
what,
consequences of all those actions as well.
Exactly, yeah. Sir, this is the truest history I can get a present of this nasty affair. So this is the kind of manager of the land writing back to the owner. Sir, this is the truest history I can present of this nasty affair, which I cannot believe to be true, but the villainy contrived and set out on foot on purpose to revenge George. 'Tis to be observed that this fellow never opposed George in his nasty attempt, never cried out or made any noise to awaken or call up any other family for his rescue, but by his own confession freely consented. If this is true, George and he are equally guilty and ought to suffer alike. Your humble servant, Francis Goodenough.
Is it good enough?
I mean,
it all sounds a bit vague to me.
it's so vague. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that they keep saying, "Oh, thereabouts."
Yeah, or maybe
with the dates.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just shows the slipperiness of their stories in the archive. That these things aren't documented very well, and there's a lot of things that you have to try to mediate. Is that the right word? Mediate. Yeah, kind of like.
Or navigate, even.
Navigate, yeah. Read between the lines.
Yeah. But I guess back then no one had watches and stuff, so times of day and names
Yeah.
seem a bit vague. Do you know what the upshot of this case was?
Well, I think the upshot of it is that nothing happened.
Right.
Yeah, it was just an accusation that ended up being just a ritual, and then because this poor boy had claimed that happened and then hadn't, then there was just a lot of confusion and nobody really knew what happened in the end at all.
So whatever it was, they got away with it.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And were there lots of stories like that?
Well, this is the oldest story that we found, but we were just going for quite a sort of broad sweep. So we also looked at sort of stories from one of the suffragettes, Mary Blaithwaite, and they have her diaries in the archive. She just documents in the diary, like, Abby is sleeping with Sarah now. And, like, she's just really interested in the sleeping arrangements for these women. And, of course, you can't say what these women are doing. It's possible that they were just sleeping in the room together.
Yeah, because people did back then, didn't they?
Yeah. But it's quite interesting that she seems to be so obsessed with it.
Wow, that's so interesting. And so what's going to come out of this?
So there's an exhibition that will be at Gloucester Archives, and that will continue, I think, until Christmas. But for me, like, this is how I tend to work. This is how I found Jenny's story, the show that I've just made, was I was touring another show, and I went to the archive to do a workshop, and then found this story. So it feels a bit like this one could be my next show.
It sounds like it might be a bawdy romp.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. Lots of petticoats.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, from one bawdy romp to another, you've had your braces removed now, haven't you?
I have, yes.
And but you need to wear a retainer, is that right?
Yeah, every night, yeah.
Yeah.
Every night for the rest of my life.
Well, wow. So, do you remember back in the annals of time, we had a question about rimming with braces?
Yes.
So,
when I read that, I thought you meant like braces to hold up your trousers.
no, with braces on your teeth. And I do believe at the time I said, if you're getting your teeth involved, you're doing it wrong. So I found an article. I came across another article by Alexander Cheves, or Cheves, or whatever it is, who we talked about last week, who was the bottoming guy, which is 21 rimming tips everyone should know. So just to back up my case. And I'm not going to go through all 21, but I just want to discuss this because, you know, everyone has a butt, and regardless of gender, they can all have a rim, right? Or receive one. So he says that he saves it as a special act to do with only certain partners, the ones that he really likes.
Yes,
How do you do that? I think so too. I don't think I'd do it with everyone.
No.
I think it would have to be, someone special. But he says we hold so much shame about our bodies and our butts that getting to that special place where you trust someone with your whole is awesome and intense and a great bit of foreplay for other forms of anal sex. So, like I said, I'm not going to do the 21 tips here, but I will put a link in the description so everyone can read the 21 tips if they so desire.
And also let us know how you get on with them.
We would love to know how you get on with your with your rimming tips. But it covers appreciating and loving butts, cleaning beforehand, but don't over clean, apparently.
What does that mean?
Well, I think it's about, because a lot of people douche, and I think if you douche too much, then you get rid of the good bacteria in your bowels, which actually helps you break down stuff and protects you from diseases and things. Have a high fibre diet, which apparently helps with all of that. There's also, you can take supplements and things like that. And apparently there's rimming lube. Did you know about this?
No, why would you need it?
No. Well, he says because saliva can dry out your skin. But I mean, not really. It's all a bit moist down there anyway, isn't it? Like naturally. Anyway, rimming lube is water-based. You can get flavoured ones, which might, be beneficial to the act. It also says don't go straight in and aggressively with the tongue. Vary it up. And spelling out words with your tongue is a classic trick.
Yes.
Have you done that?
Well, I've done that with blowjobs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Was that something that just came naturally to you, or did you read it in a book
No,
somewhere?
I think I was quite bored. And so I thought, let's see if I can spell euphemism.
The classic trick keeps your tongue moving in different directions instead of making the same repetitive motion. There's other things like using your stubble or your beard if you're scruffy, bit like me. Which
Feather duster?
Which I guess you could use a feather duster. Although I wouldn't want to get feathers up there, would you?
No, probably not.
Yeah. My mum used to, oh my God. When I was a kid, I used to have fits of laughing all the time where I just couldn't stop giggling. And my mum used to say, "What's wrong with you? Have you got a feather up your bum?" This is just what you've reminded me of. So stubble and beard excite the area. And don't forget the other parts down there, like the taint. Do you know what the taint is?
No.
So it's that little bit between your legs, basically, which isn't your bum and isn't your balls. It's that bit in the middle.
The bit between Christmas and New Year.
Yeah. That's what we're going to call it, the taint this year. Taintmas. Don't bite. I'm backed up with this. So, but I guess you could have a little nibble of the butt cheeks, but you don't want to be biting that, sensitive area.
Yeah,
that you'd be rimming.
Yeah, biting cheeks, I think, is fun.
Yeah, a little nibble, not too hard. And finally, get loud. I think if you're receiving it, because then it shows your appreciation.
Okay.
Yeah. So rimming is one of the few sex acts where you need some verbal or physical reassurance from the receptive person that it feels good. Just moan or a little butt shake tells your partner that you're having a good time. He says he gets very loud when he feels good. Groan, let go, moan into the pillow. That's your partner's invite to keep going. So, are you loud with sex?
No, but my next door neighbour is.
I never used to be, but I had a French boyfriend who was very loud, and it just kind of rubbed off on me. So
Well, it's part of your canon of voice work, isn't it?
Actually, that's the only thing I haven't done, a porn voiceover. So, yeah, that's on my bucket list.
Well,
I'll do the porn voiceover. Right, so there you go. That's your not quite 21 tips for rimming. Do you feel educated now?
I think I probably knew all of them. Apart from
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought that making a noise would be that important, but I could see why, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know the spelling out stuff with your tongue. So that's new to me. And I think I'll be doing that next time.
What are you like at spelling?
Pretty bad, but I guess it doesn't matter when you're
It'd
doing
be funny
it.
if someone was like, "No, that's not how you spell it."
Yeah, and I'd just say, don't be anal about it. Anyway, we've got a guest,
I know, it's very exciting.
special guest, who's been on before, but the fabulous Dickie Bowes going to talk to us. He's got a new show coming out. He's been doing a lot in the West Country recently, so we can talk about that.
Maybe you might be moving.
Well, maybe we'll get that out of him. But we'll have a little break with our adverts. If you don't like our adverts, you can subscribe to Acast Plus and get it ad-free. And if you do the Acast higher tier, then you get some extra bits. But I'm not putting any extra bits on until people subscribe. So
There's an incentive.
right then, so shall we have a little break? And then we'll come back with Dickie.
Great.
So we are back and we have a very special guest, don't we, Tommy?
Very special.
Very special. We have performer extraordinaire and actor Dickie Bowe.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. On the whole, I think I'm a bit delirious with fatigue. I had my first day of rehearsal today, so my brain is full of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where are you? You're just down the road, aren't you?
Well, I'm not rehearsing just down the road at the moment. I'm
Oh.
in London right now, but I will be just down the road in a few weeks' time in
Okay.
Bath.
And this is
At the
your
Theatre Royal.
your new show.
It's a new show, yeah, called Showmanism, which has a nod in there to shamanism, which I hope is quite obvious.
Oh. Are you willing to tell us a little bit more about it without giving the complete game away?
Yeah, I'll try. So, well, it originated because Deborah Warner cast me as Ariel in her production of The Tempest, which we did earlier this summer at the
Which I saw.
Which Tom saw. Yeah, you
You
saw
were
it.
very good.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. It was good.
How did that
Yeah.
come about? How did you suddenly doing Shakespeare come about?
Well, actually, I played Ariel once before for Deborah Warner.
Oh, okay.
In Salzburg.
Right.
That would have been, I think, about 6 years ago. And what happened was I met Deborah Warner through Fiona Shaw, actually, because Fiona Shaw was my mentor when I won a thing called the Oxford Samuel Beckett Theatre Trust Award. And so I met Deborah Warner at dinner at Fiona Shaw's house. And then after that, Deborah came to see a couple of my shows. And then she called me up and said, I have an idea, let's have tea. So we went for tea. And she had the idea that it would make sense for Ariel to be a channel for voices within The Tempest. And so she took me out to Salzburg and we did it. And the production actually was in German primarily.
Wow.
So yeah, I had to learn Ariel in German, although in the end, it was a mixture of German and English.
Did you
for
speak
me.
German beforehand?
No.
But all of the text is you lip syncing your own words.
In The Tempest?
Yeah, is that right?
Well, in Salzburg, the experiments took different forms. So we began, if I remember rightly, with various performances from different actors doing it in German, and then the conceit sort of became that the language of magic, when Ariel was communicating with Prospero, was in Shakespeare's English, but when Ariel communicated with other characters, like for example with Ferdinand when he's luring him towards Prospero, and when he's the harpy, for example, they were in German. Yeah, so I had to learn multiple versions and multiple performances, because there were different there were different takes, of with different flavors of performance. So it was quite a concentration challenge, but actually harder than learning my own stuff in German as Ariel was learning everything that was going on around in German.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, because you have to be prepared for something to go wrong, which it did, like somebody giving you the wrong cue, and know that you have to come in anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And it was a mixture of my live voice and pre-recorded, lip-synced stuff. And similarly, when we did it in Bath, it was a mixture of my voice and mainly Fiona Shaw's voice. Ours were the two main voices. Yeah.
And then Showmanism was born out of that slightly.
Sort of, yeah. So we'd been to Salzburg, and then Deborah decided she wanted to do The Tempest again, and she asked me if I would play Ariel again in this new production for the Ustinov in Bath. And she said, I also have an idea that maybe you could make a new solo show to close the first season. So The Tempest opened the season, and she said, why don't you make a new show? And her original provocation was to make a show that was like a concise history of the theatre. Like a one-man show that's a concise history of the theatre. And I said, well, I'm not sure that's exactly the show that I want to make. So can I take that provocation and sort of go off-road with it? And she said, okay. So that's what showmanism is. Because I didn't want to do something that was a sort of like a textbook in 3D.
No.
That was completely pedagogic. I wanted to sort of find my way in using my own process, really. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's so then I went off and interviewed lots of people and talked to them about different aspects of performance.
Are they people that have got a history with that, or did you move away from that?
Yeah, they are. And so I decided, rather than doing a concise history of performance, I said, how about I do a concise history of the theatre? I said, how about I do a concise histrionic of performance? And because I felt that was more in alignment with my sensibility. And so, yeah, I interviewed Ian McKellen, who was a starring voice in an earlier show that I did called Remember Me. And I interviewed a range of other people. Not all of them are going to make it into the show, but they include Patsy Rodenberg, the famous voice teacher, Steve Nallon, who was the voice of Margaret Thatcher famously in Spitting Image, and he was on a television show called First Impressions. Who else? Mimi Denisi, who is in Greece a very famous actress and has performed in some of these ancient theatres. So I was interested in her experience of what it's like to be in those spaces as a performer. But I also interviewed people who weren't necessarily so front and centre in the world of the theatre, like actually Rupert Christensen, who is an opera critic, and Deborah had paired me up with him to be my dramaturg. And so, yeah, I just collected these voices. And then since, as I collected them, I started to sort of try to navigate a path through them. So in a way, it's like, the process is like, gathering a whole ocean of material and then going into it and diving for pearls and then pulling out the pearls and then stringing them together in some kind of way, which is, so it's a collage, but there is also a sort of a journey that has logics to it through the voices.
What was your experience like of doing The Tempest at Bath, and how did you perceive the audience's responses to it? Because Bath is quite it's got quite a traditional kind of mainstream thing. When I saw the show, I was really shocked how big it was and how, for such a small, studio-based show.
Yeah.
And a lot of the audience, I suppose, were those kind of like, it felt very kind of like a mainstream audience.
Yeah, I think it was probably Bath's regular audience, I guess. I mean, I don't know whether a mainstream theatre crowd is even that interested in Shakespeare. I think Shakespeare can be challenging at the best of times, and the experience for me, having done the Tempest in Salzburg, it was really different, because when we did it there, we were in an enormous theatre space, like about 1,000 people, and the stage was bigger than the footprint of the entire Ustinov studio, including the auditorium and the audience. So to do it in that much smaller space was very different, but I think I really think that it was a good production. I think there was a sense of scale to it. It's good to hear that you thought that it was surprising in its kind of largeness.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And do you think you'll get a different crowd for Showmanism then?
I've got no idea. I mean, I suppose that some people who saw The Tempest and maybe have some curiosity about what I'm going to do, having seen me do Ariel, will come, hopefully. But I think it would be great if the crowd was a bit more mixed than only a niche crowd. I think it would be good if we could pull in some people that might not ordinarily go.
Well, that's probably why they've pulled you in, Dickie.
Well, I mean, I hope I have got that pulling power.
I'm sure you do.
You're going to bring the queers in.
Well, that would be great. I would love it if the Ustinov studio was replete with queers on any given night.
And can you give us a little window into the type of thing that will be included in the performance?
Yeah, so the interviews that I've done, I've kind of been a bit creative in looking for opportunities to theatricalize often like accidentals that people say in an interview situation, stuff that would normally not make the final cut of an interview, little asides and stuff that I can transform into something that seems relevant to what's happening live in the space.
Right.
So recasting things that they say that to make them refer to an object, for example, that I'm holding, or that kind of.
They're doing a bit of that in Married at First Sight.
Don't they just do that in all reality TV? Lots of things are said out of context and shoved in places.
Yeah. So there's a bit of that.
Have you been doing any shamanistic practices as part of your research?
Well, the nod to shamanism comes from just a few kind of what I think are probably quite obvious connection points. Like, because I've been lip syncing, making shows around lip sync for so long, it's happened that people have compared me to like a medium or a channel and this kind of thing. And, the idea of a controlled trance is quite a sort of well-known feature of shamanistic practice. So I wanted to play with that idea. The idea of, I was also curious about just exploring the idea of like, what is the role of a performer potentially in relation to a community? Because often one of the reasons I think I probably ended up on the stage is because I felt like I didn't really belong, and I would quite like to be in the middle of the bed. I mean, I was often considered to be strange, but I didn't necessarily want to be. And so in a funny kind of way, I think being on stage is a way of being in the middle of the bed, and becoming part, like joining the human race, while feeling kind of like detached from it. And then, so I was thinking, well, what's the sort of purpose that one can have in that role? Is it, the kind of cliche is that performers, actors, theatre makers are storytellers, which is one strand. But then there's also a question of like, are there ways of like, just shining a light in the places where we don't necessarily always lurk, and and even without the risk of sounding grandiose, are there ways in which one can be of service to a community? I hesitate to say the word healer, but I suppose that was part of my inquiry, because also I think that making the show came on the back of, or actually in the middle of, a kind of a dark night of the soul where I was like, why am I doing this?
But also,
I
think theatre performance is quite shamanistic in a way, because it is quite ritualistic as well. And you're holding an audience and transforming them and taking them somewhere else.
We've just been talking about Molly House rituals.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And how they Well, they used to do this thing where they'd obviously dress up in women's clothing, and then they would reenact a birth. But in that little snippet, it was saying it would be like rebirthing their kind of queer personality and renaming them. And I was also saying, well, back then, because when was that? 1700s? There's no music, there's no TV, there's no internet. You're doing it to entertain each other, aren't you? And but I love that ritualistic vibe of that. Yeah,
and I wanted to try, I mean, I hesitate to say a return, but, well, maybe return is in a way the right word, because I often think of queerness, for me, I like to think of queerness as being about a kind of a return to a sort of pre-normative state or way of being. It's often framed as being something that's, as being in opposition to, like the normative or the dominant. But I like the idea of it being sort of transcendent of the normative, like not necessarily having to be in opposition to, because again, I think that's a kind of a binary again, the opposition. And there's this sort of, I wonder whether the trope of theatre being, the heart of theatre being about conflict, being a bit too facile somehow. I wonder whether something maybe got lost in translation there, that it need not necessarily only be about, one head banging against another head, that, that maybe there are other ways of thinking about dynamic contradiction within like a performance field. Yeah. And what, like in a model, I think the whole enterprise has been problematized by the orthodoxies of business. Because theatre's a business, isn't it? And in a consumer capitalist culture, it's all about, the emphasis is so much on productivity, on products, and so with this, I wanted to really prioritize the process and really ask myself, why, because the dark night of the soul that I referred to was, part of that involved the realization that, I don't really want to do it in order to get up on stage in order to show off anymore. Like, I think I probably got into it for that reason, because it felt somehow like it was a path to receiving love. But at this point, it feels too shallow to do it just so that people can say, well done, aren't you wonderful? So I was like, okay, I would like to search for a bit of a deeper meaning, which, I don't want to give people the wrong idea. I think the show is still nevertheless fun and entertaining and engaging, I hope. But I felt like I needed to find a deeper reason for doing this kind of work, So I was thinking, I was very close to dropping everything, like throwing in the towel and going, actually, I think I'm going to retrain and become a therapist.
Wow.
Which I haven't completely ruled out, but I've got to get this show done first.
Well, we'll be calling on your therapy skills later, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
For our Queens of Agony section. You're not going to get away without doing that.
Oh, yeah, great. Fabulous.
So when is the show on?
So it's from the 11th of November till the 10th of December. It's quite a long run, actually. So please do round up the queers in Bristol and bring them down. If it helps, I spend some of this show in various states of undress.
Well, I was going to say, I don't want to be shallow, but you are looking really buff in the picture. Have you always been that buff?
Underneath.
I think I just used to seeing you in baggy clothes or a costume.
Yes, I often wear baggy clothes. Yeah. I'm a bit of a shrinking violet in some ways, traditionally. And I go through phases. Yeah, I go through phases probably of being a little bit, but I'm not super buff. I'm not really like a gym bunny. I'm not, I'm not like a superhero or anything like that. I don't have that kind of a body, I don't think. But I don't think I look terrible in my underpants.
I think you look very fit. And
you can stay.
And I think lots of other people do too. You keep popping up on things that I'm watching on the telly as well.
Do I?
I saw you in Sandman.
Oh, yes.
What was you were the Shredder?
I was the Shredder, yeah.
Yeah. Which was is that a serial killer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Shredder is one of the serial killers, yeah. In the Collectors, they did like a double episode, The Collectors, towards the end of The Sandman. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was such fun.
Great. Are you a big Neil Gaiman fan?
I haven't. I have read the Sandman, but I hadn't really read that much of his stuff before. I'd seen a couple of adaptations, but I hadn't. But yeah, I am a fan. I like his sensibility, and I met him once years ago, and I did a cabaret gig at the Donmar Warehouse. Met him backstage, and he was so like shy and diffident and kind of like humble that I didn't realize at the time, who he was. It was only afterwards I was like, oh my God, that was Neil Gaiman, because he's so famous. But he was just really kind of discreet and kind of shy and humble and sweet to everybody. You would never know. Yeah. I mean, I would recognize him now, but at that time I didn't know what he looked like.
No. And so
are you a fan?
Yeah, I am. I'm a big fan of Neil Gaiman. Are you popping up in anything else that I might be watching? Or are you not allowed to tell us?
I'm in another show on the iPlayer, AIDS, the Unheard Tapes, which is a lip sync creative documentary based around tapes mostly from the 80s. So I'm in that.
And what is it you're doing in that? What character are you kind of playing?
It's called Michael. He was a drag queen.
Yeah, I thought I saw you in drag in the ad for that.
Yeah. So that was a lovely.
And is that still on iPlayer?
Yeah, that's still on.
I want to watch that.
Yeah, no, it's a really good, worthwhile piece of documentary making, I think, and I think they did a really beautiful job on it.
Great. Okay. Well, shall we do some Queens of Agony?
Yeah, test out therapy skills.
Yeah, we're going to test out your therapy skills.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to have another dark night of the soul here, won't I?
Well, we have a little gong bath before we do this. So.
That feels better.
Yeah. Wash away the rest of the episode. So, dear old Queens and Dickie, obviously, has your taste in men changed as you got older? Has your sexuality changed as you've aged? I don't mean changing from gay to straight, but more what you find attractive. Are you attracted to the same sort of men in your 40s and 50s as you were attracted to in your 20s, for example? Have your taste widened or become more specific? I'd be interested to hear about your experiences. Wow. What do you reckon? I think they've definitely changed.
Yeah, mine have changed, yeah.
Mine have as well, yeah. It's quite a penetrating question, isn't it?
Yeah. More ways than one.
I didn't expect to be put on the spot in quite that way.
Well, I just think you have different. Like, I think in your 20s, you don't really know who you are
Yeah.
or what you want.
Yeah, I've just certainly become sort of more liberated sexually. But also that question is asking like who you would find attractive. And now, like, nearly being 50, like, so I would be attracted to people that could be 60.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't even think about that.
Yeah.
I guess there's a broader spectrum of people that you would find attractive as you get older. I don't know, Dickie,
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, because in a way, I mean, I agree with you that when you say that. I mean, I certainly in my 20s, I didn't know who I was, but then I meet people who are in their 20s now, queer people in their 20s now, and they seem so much more evolved and, clear about, what they're interested in, and, open about exploring their desires and kinks and things like that than I ever was when I was at that age. I was much more uptight.
But we weren't exposed to. There was no internet when we were kids, so we weren't exposed to that level, and also it being queer or gay or whatever was not de rigueur back then at all. So it was all very closeted, and it was difficult to talk to people about what you're meant to be like
But
as
also,
a queer person.
Just that thing about sex positive, like I don't think I knew what that as an expression, what that meant when I was young. Like, and so if you don't have that word for it, then you can't find it within yourself, can you?
No, you can't. And of course, it's an interesting moment, isn't it? Because with OnlyFans and everything, and I sometimes get a bit confused about. Because I'm all for people being sex positive. And then on the other hand, for example, this is getting into controversial territory, but I look to someone like Madonna, you know what I mean? And I think her messaging is so confused. Like, on the one hand, she complains that she's being, about ageism. But to my eye, with all of the work that she's done on herself and so on, and the way that she sort of seems to want to frame herself as being a sort of sexy teenager or something, that actually she's the one who's got the problem with ageism. You know what I mean? And I do wonder, it's just a question, I haven't got an answer for it, and I'm sure it's different for different people, but I do wonder whether there is something what Madonna seemed to be a pioneer of as much as anything else is the commodification of her own sexuality, and that's held up as being empowering, but in another way, I look at her and I wonder whether it's a kind of bondage also. And so when I look to the phenomenon of OnlyFans, I also wonder, how much of that is about liberation, and how much of that actually ends up sort of conforming and constraining in some way.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's different for different people, but it's a question. But we didn't have that when we were 20 in our 20s.
No, we certainly didn't. I mean, I think I was scrambling around in the dark. I think when I was in my early 20s, I just thought I met someone, I had sex with them, and then I'd just go out with them.
Well, sex is still framed as being right at the center of a relationship, isn't it? Like, it's the main event, isn't it, of a relationship?
Yeah. And so I think I ended up being a serial monogamist in my 20s, which wasn't particularly good for anyone. So, and I think I'm in a much better place with all that stuff now. Anyway, shall we move on?
Yeah, because we totally covered that one.
I think we probably, I'm pretty sure we haven't. But I do, I think it, well, no, I think your outlook definitely changes. You're a different person. You know who you are more, so therefore you know what you like. And so, yeah, it's always going to completely change. It's going to be, the goalposts will move. It's ever evolving what you find attractive.
My tastes definitely haven't narrowed, though. I don't know about yours. They haven't narrowed. They've definitely broadened rather than narrowed.
Yeah, completely. I think my tastes were very much narrower when I was younger, whereas now I think I'm more open to all sorts of people for different reasons as well.
Yeah, same. Yeah, and it's not necessarily only about a visual attraction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tommy, do you concur?
Totally. I was just reading the next question.
Doing a preemptive strike. Okay, dear old quiz, Dickie, a theory. Many gay/queer people are visually gifted and excel at being artists, set designers, hair and makeup people. And I wonder if we developed a keen eye for detail looking for other queers. I know I'm generalizing, but before apps and in rural areas, it was all about eye contact, noticing subtleties. Just wondering if you'd ever thought of this theory. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, what a rich question. The first thought I had was, it reminded me initially of, that thing Quentin Crisp said was, it may be true that artists adopt a flamboyant appearance, but it's also true that people who look funny get stuck with the arts. And that happened to me.
That's a great quote.
But it also reminds me of that David Halperin book, How to Be Gay. Have you come across that book?
No.
It's kind of an academic book, but he talks about that thing of that phenomenon of how by some strange osmosis, it seems that he talks particularly about gay men being a kind of like naturally somehow attuned to certain cultural, objects, certain arenas, like, the theatre foyer, of a Broadway musical. And, how without having communicated it, or learned it formally, that there's a kind of, people cluster around certain camp tropes and stuff like that, So I think there is and it's to do with the outsider perspective probably as well.
I think totally. Because another friend of mine asked me a few years ago, they were like, why are gay men attracted to people like gay icons like Bette Davis and Joan Crawford and Liza Minnelli? Because I was attracted to those people when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So
same.
probably before I even realised what my sexuality was.
Yeah.
And it's weird how so many gay people, queer people are attracted to those people. It's almost like it is in our DNA. But I think it is because they are others themselves.
Yeah. Like someone like Betty Davis, she's like an alpha female, right? She's and she can. My perception of her is that she could hold her own in any situation with anyone. If the norm, if the dominant is like the cis het white man, everybody else is basically marginalized.
Yeah.
And so when you see a figure that would ordinarily be marginalized, but somehow is broken through and is like the queen of their own castle, if you like, then maybe that somehow reflects a desire within oneself to be able to transcend the norm.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything in that? I don't know.
I think so. And also with someone like Judy Garland, who's just a little bit broken as well, which also reflects how you feel as an outsider. I don't know, we just kind of intrinsically identify with these icons, don't we?
Yeah, and there's that sort of dichotomy of being sort of tragic, but also putting on a front and being the life and soul.
Yeah, and successful, and yeah.
There's something as well about this question that made me think, well, I don't know whether that actually is true, because you go down to like the Bear Bar in Bristol, and then they're not all set designers and makeup artists. They're just like, I think that you think of queer people as being that, but that's just because you're thinking of the people that are in the public eye or that are celebrated. But
more visible members of the community.
Yeah, that's definitely true. But I don't know. There is something in it in terms
of... A lot of the boyfriends that I've had have been very dull.
Have they? Okay.
Where'd you meet them, Tom?
Why do you want to?
Not in the art gallery.
I've never picked up in an art gallery, I don't think, or in a theatre, actually.
No, it's not really a pickup spot, is it? Although the Garrick's, was it the Garrick's Head? Or there is, in the Theatre Royal in Bath,
Yes.
half of that bar was traditionally a gay bar.
It's not
Was it?
anymore.
Yeah. Back in the 90s.
It's definitely not now.
I used to live in Bath in the 90s, and it was traditionally a gay bar.
There is one gay bar in Bath, isn't there? I didn't actually, all the time I was there, and I didn't go in it, but I walked past it several times.
I mean, that's as good as.
Forgotten.
Maybe it's just a different scene in Bath. Maybe they meet in other areas. Maybe
Is
they
it-
are
is it-
meeting in
is
the
it-
art gallery.
Is the queer scene in Bristol very thriving?
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah?
And there's lots of different things, but it's also very integrated as well in Bristol. I think Bath is, I always felt when I was living there, I definitely didn't feel I fitted in. And I was living in Bristol before, and I moved back to Bristol just because I just felt it just welcomed people. I had more friends here. I could make friends here, whereas I found it more difficult in Bath. But I don't know whether that's changed.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but I think I'm going to try and come out and have a few nights out in Bristol while I'm in Bath on this time. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, of course. Come over. We'll take you out.
Okay.
So, having an eye for duty, I guess you might have a gaydar. Is that what they're saying? If you've got a gaydar, then you might be an artist.
It's kind of, it also makes me think of, and this is maybe getting a bit heady, but I have this theory about like Oscar Wilde, like as being like the progenitor of the type of the homosexual. Like he didn't refer to himself as a homosexual, and of course, like the word homosexual was only like a mid-19th century invention. But like he seemed to settle into like what we now might think of as a more conventional homosexual identity structure after he'd been in prison, and I think really crucially when he was in exile. So he was an outsider from the culture that he had adopted, because of course he was an outsider in a way to begin with. And I also think that one of the reasons that he ended up in prison was that the Marquis of Queensberry was because up until the middle of the 19th century in public schools, like it was common for boys to not only share a room but to share a bed. You know what I mean? There was a kind of a romantic culture around young men together and young women together. People had romances in their friendships. I think that the Marquis of Queensberry was so like incensed at not necessarily the idea that his son was being potentially sodomized, but that it was that he was potentially being sodomized by an Irishman. You know what I mean? Someone from the original colony, and so I think there's something about, and then him settling into this kind of homosexual identity in later life while he was in exile, I think says something to me about just an outsider perspective, like a shared subjectivity of outsiderism, that I think that question for me speaks to a bit, that there is an eye for something from the outsider gaze of the gays.
Yeah.
When things become kind of more integrated, then I wonder whether that outsider status ceases to exist.
Well, I wonder about that. I think it hasn't ceased to exist for me, but I think that's because of the time that I grew up in. Yeah. And I knew that I was gay from like a really early age. I was precociously aware. I felt
think
that.
There's a sense of inherited trauma around that as well, or not trauma necessarily, but inherited outsiderness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think trauma is not an inappropriate word. I know it's used very glibly nowadays, but I don't think it's an inappropriate word for that experience. Because trauma is about the effect, isn't it? It's about the effect of an emotional climate or a social climate or a series of events on the nervous system, really.
Okay. So do you think we've ambiguously answered that?
I think that's
great.
If you don't answer them to the satisfaction of the questioner, do they write in and complain?
They can do, but whether I read them or not is a different matter. So, I mean, these aren't deeply personal questions. These are just kind of statements, aren't they? Anyway, dear old Queens and Dickie, do people like mask subs? I'm a super mask presenting guy. I find that many people assume, based upon my looks and personality, that I'd lean to be on the dom side. But at heart, I've always really secretly wanted to be used as a sub. Do you think there are a decent amount of people out there that prefer mask subs, or am I doomed? Apologies, I'm pretty new to all this, so don't really know.
Why do they say I'm a super masculine presenting guy? Why has he said he's super?
Maybe he wears a Superman outfit, which I would
Well, he's
say.
just saying he's very masculine.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I wouldn't have thought latex is that masculine, but you know. What do you think, Dickie?
So the question is he doomed, or is he going to find... I mean, I'm sure that he'll be able to find someone who is into a super mask.
Yeah. He just needs to find his tribe, really, or find the right app.
Yeah, maybe it's about finding the right app.
I think he just needs to be explicit about what he
wants.
Yeah. And who he is.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he's not... he's not... Because he's presenting as mask, he's not giving off the nods that he wants to be sub. So he needs to actually literally put that out there.
I don't think everyone would assume that about if someone was presenting that way, then they would automatically be.
I think they do. I think they definitely do on apps. Yeah, but because it's also shallow in a way. It's like Argos for men, isn't it? It's
sort of quite binary to put yourself in. Just think about ways that people look and ways that people perform in that kind of way.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit like what Peter and I were talking about in the last episode about how like people are very they identify as top or bottom, and actually when I came out in the 90s, I don't think anybody identified as that. I think you just do, you just try things out and do them with people. It wasn't. There seems to be a very binary way of looking at the sexual act these days.
Yeah, I don't even remember top and bottom being expressions that were used in the mid-90s.
Not at all.
Yeah. What were used? I mean, I'm not sure it wasn't so cut and dry, was it? And it's fun. It's interesting that people have really become, and it's amazing to me also, like, like a 22-year-old will know exactly what they want, that they are like what kinks they're into, and what position that they want to be in, and blah, blah, blah. It's amazing to me.
Yeah. But I think harkening back to the earlier question, I think even if they think they know what they like now, I think that will change. Because there's always room for maneuverability as you get older. Because you want to try different things anyway, don't you?
Yeah, just get bored.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you feel about, because it's a role play as well, isn't it? Like there's some kind of, inherently there's a role play going on when you describe yourself as being a sub, like wanting to be used. And so what do you think about that in relation to sex? Because in some ways, like, is the role play presumably is potentially a barrier to intimacy, isn't it? Like, if you, rather than just being, your authentic self in the moment without any kind of like category imposed on that.
I would disagree with that. I think if this guy, he's obviously into kink. I think if he's saying mask or sub, and actually I think some of that role play can allow you to open up and be what you actually want to be, rather than it allows you to express that because you become someone else.
Explore facets of yourself that may otherwise be kept under wraps.
Yeah, that would be repressed in everyday life.
Yeah, so it's maybe not so narrow. Maybe it's a way of broadening your expression.
Yeah, but
on the other hand, I think it speaks to quite spontaneous hookups when you automatically go into those.
Yeah, it's
those kind of
it's
roles.
very it's just the apps, isn't it? It's like everything is. You even have to fill out categories about all of this stuff, about what you want and how you want it, and it's just like, well, can't you just go with the flow with that? Because everybody's different.
Yeah, it depends on the dynamic. Yeah, you can't always tell what that's going to be until you're in the room together.
Yeah, totally. And certain things that you might think you want to do with one person, you want to do a different thing with somebody else. So maybe be open to being more dom.
You ruined his fun.
but then find someone who will explore also being a dom, and you can be the sub. I think he needs to find his tribe and move in a different field and then he can explore all of his sexuality. Let's move on because I'm conscious of time.
Okay.
Dear Old Queens and Dickie, this is the last question, by the way.
Okay.
What's your idea of the perfect date? So the question is pretty self-explanatory. I'm asking this because I myself am heavily leaning towards a cozy vibe when it comes to dates. And I'm wondering if other LGBT men feel the same way.
What's an owl man?
Who knows? Like, there's a whole pizza of genders now, right? So, and he missed the cue off. So, or women. So, what do you reckon? Because anyone can have a date, right? It's not restricted to, to LGBT men.
I just want a picnic.
That sounds cozy.
Yeah.
I wish I knew a bit more about what was meant by cozy.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know. Is this a reaction against just sex meets, or is it?
Oh, yeah, I see.
I mean, there's certain things I think are bad for dates.
Oh, yeah?
Like, I don't think going to the cinema is a good date.
Not for a good first date, no.
No. I mean, I guess it could be a date somewhere down the line.
Yeah, a bit further along the line, it's quite fun, isn't it, to go to pictures?
Yeah. But a good first date is not going to the cinema because you don't get to know someone. I guess you could have dinner beforehand, but you want.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think, yeah.
What about a sing-along cinema experience?
Sing, so like sing along the Sound of Music.
That might be fun.
That would also be fun, but also I think off the wall things are quite interesting for a date. Like do something really unusual.
Pottery class.
A pottery class would be. Yeah.
That's a good idea.
That's a great
very
first
good
date.
idea.
Yeah, because I think if you're kind of both out of your comfort zone, then you kind of get to know someone a little bit better, don't you?
Yeah, but also you get to play, like, one of you can be Demi Moore and one of you can be Patrick Swayze.
Yes. I actually bought a pottery experience for my birthday, so I'm looking forward to that.
Oh.
Who should I be, Demi Moore or Patrick Swayze?
My instinct is to say Patrick Swayze, but look, I don't want to impose.
Are you going to bring anyone on the class?
There's a whole group of people going, so...
And you're dating all of them?
I'm not, but I hope so. It's not a date. It's just an experience.
You should turn up at the class expecting this as a date.
Bit like speed dating. Speed pottery dating. I haven't decided what I'm going to make yet.
Have you ever done speed dating?
Yes. That's also really odd because you get like 5 minutes with someone and it's a little bit like an interview. But I find dates are a little bit like an interview anyway. Don't you?
Depends. Well, it depends on what the date, like what your motives are for having the date. I mean, if it's a date that's when you're looking for a boyfriend specifically, or they are, then probably they can be a bit like an interview. Yeah.
But also, if they don't talk very much, I end up asking loads of questions, and it feels like I'm interviewing them. But I guess that's probably a bad date. So
a cozy dinner is a good idea for a date, isn't it?
Always, I think that's always a nice date. But any off the wall dates for you, Dickie? What would you do?
Off the wall? Oh God, I don't know if I'm really that outre. I'm quite simple. When the weather is congenial, a walk down by the canal might be quite nice.
Yeah.
But I have seen on the app sometimes like people saying that they want cuddles. I've seen that quite a bit. So I wonder if that's what they mean. And that to me is weird because I've been invited. Like people have said to me, "Do you want to come around for a cuddle?" And I'm like, I've never met you before. I don't know if I do want to come around for cuddles. Like that feels.
But isn't that just a euphemism for sex?
Oh, is it?
I'm assuming it is.
So naive.
I mean,
really?
Cuddles are nice, but I imagine that cuddles is like moving on to something else.
Are you regretting that you
cuddles,
didn't
but...
accept it now, Dickie?
Yeah, I am a little bit. I often think that sometimes I think, what I would really like is to have a bath with someone. So that could be an interesting date, couldn't it? Have a bath together.
That's very intimate for a first date.
It's intimate for a first date, you're
Yeah.
right.
I mean, that's almost like a sex meet.
It is.
But
yeah,
you could
and
do
maybe it's
it.
more
You could do
intimate
it in
than couples.
You could do it in Bath, in the Roman baths.
Yeah.
You can't go in there though, can you?
In the baths. Yeah, well, there's a spa there.
Oh, it is a spa.
Yeah, they've got a lovely rooftop
you could
pool
go
and
to
stuff.
Going to the spa could be, because it's not quite as full on as going to a sauna.
No.
But you can go in for a spa experience, have a massage, hang out, chat.
And you get an eye of the goods without actually committing.
Yeah, that's kind of a hot date, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. That's a good date.
I'm going to try that. Not that I tend to go on dates anymore, but actually trying to get a date is really difficult. So everybody just wants sex.
Oh yeah.
So an actual date is actually a hard thing to find.
Well, you
I
shouldn't be so
fancy.
And the
good
more
at it,
available. What's that?
I said, Bernie shouldn't be so good at it.
But the more available sex is as well, I wonder whether it makes people feel a bit more precious about the time that they're going to give for like a date. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think I feel a bit like that sometimes, a bit like, oh, okay, I mean, that's an investment, like that I might spend a whole evening with somebody new. And I'm constantly telling my friends I haven't got time to catch up,
Yeah.
So, and it's hard to tell through an app whether, it would be nice to meet people in the real world, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I feel that's an art which is kind of falling by the wayside to actually meet people in real life.
Yeah, and how do you ask them out, and when is it appropriate or not as well?
Yeah, and I think as things get more integrated, that gets more and more difficult. Because when you used to go to a gay bar, you just assumed everybody there was open to being approached.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas now it's a bit of a mixed playing field, I would have thought.
In terms of their expectations.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, maybe we'll get some answers to these questions by coming to see your show, Dickie.
To those questions?
Not those ones in particular, but some questions.
There will be answers to some questions. Yeah, right. I think there's some interesting stuff there that people might not have heard of before or thought about before. Certainly I hadn't. And I think it's a little bit sexy in some ways. It's still coming together. I only had day one of rehearsal, so we're still making it.
It's ever evolving.
So perhaps this conversation is going to feed into it in some way.
Yeah. And obviously it'll be a great date to take someone on.
Oh, I think actually, it might not be a terrible date.
Yeah, I think it would be a good date.
Because one of the things that came up in many of the conversations that I had around theatre was that theatre is, largely about conversation. You know what I mean? Like it's about, within the piece, within the show, there's often some kind of conversational activity going on, some kind of like thing being thought through, sort of in a conversational way. But also, Aoife Monks, who's an academic at Queen Mary, was talking about how, in some ways, the theatre isn't the main event. The show isn't necessarily the main event. The main event is the conversations that it triggers, and it's those conversations that bring people together and help people show each other who they are. So I think actually going to a theatre show that is about ideas will potentially be a great way for people to get to know each other. Yeah, because then they can get together, talk about the ideas afterwards, and then you really get the measure of each other. And then there's nothing hotter than somebody who's really able to wrestle with a meaty idea.
I love a meaty idea, don't you, Tommy?
Oh yeah.
Well, on that bombshell, I think we've come to the end of the podcast. Dickie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really good to see you both again. And I look forward to reconvening after my stint in Bath and our nights out in Bristol so we can reflect.
Yes, do. Come back anytime. And so looking forward to your show.
Yeah, I really hope you like it.
I'm sure we're going to love it.
We will love it.
I hope so. Yeah, I think there's stuff to like in it. I think there is some stuff that you'll like.
Well, definitely. Okay, so Dickie, please say goodbye to our lovely audience.
Goodbye, lovely audience.
Tommy,
Look after yourselves.
Tommy said goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Lovely audience. You can catch us next time on What That Old Queen.
You have been listening to What That Old Queen, written and presented by Tom Marshman and Bernie Hodges. The show was produced by Bernie Hodges for Hodge Podcasting in 2022. If you have a question for the old queens, or you'd like to be a guest, or you want to sponsor a show and give us lots of money, you can email hello@thatoldqueen.com or find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.